Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. The Ukraine war is actually at a very, very important point in terms of the battles that are taking place on the ground. Many people look at the battle and say that nothing has moved. Some people say there's a very important battle that is taking place that might just decide the entire story of the war. Let's discuss this particular thing with a guest who's there on Dev Talks for the first time, Mr. Ravi Joshi, who is from our Indian Research and Analysis Wing, or the RAW. Sir, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Aadi. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Sir, there's this Ukraine war has basically taken over the entire conversation as far as international multilateral relations are concerned today. How do you see this, overarching importance that has been given, and what do you see happening?
Okay, now there's no point in going back to the historical origins of this war. That's fairly well known now, and we're already in a situation where it seems both the parties are irrevocably and irretrievably locked on to a fairly never-ending war. I mean, it's going to be a long-standing war now. It's going to be a frozen war in Europe for a pretty long time. I say this because of two reasons. One is that when President Putin entered Ukraine or invaded Ukraine in February 24th, 2022, he had certain limited objectives, and he called it a special operations. And three of them were basically he had three objectives, and first was demilitarize Ukraine. Second was to denazify Ukrainian armed forces, and third was to protect and defend the Russian population in the Donbass region of Ukraine, which is eastern Ukraine and southwestern Russia. So none of the objectives have now been achieved at the end of 1 year. He has substantially demilitarized or downgraded the military strength of Ukraine. There's no doubt about that. But in the meantime, he has also lost a huge amount of manpower and conventional armed forces in the sense of equipment, military equipment. So there's been the losses have been actually nobody knows exactly for sure as to what's the loss on either side, but the losses have been substantial on both sides, and Ukraine has definitely lost much more than Russia. And Russia has gained substantially in territory. One must admit the fact that the Donbass region has now been annexed officially and legally by an act of parliament by the Russian State Duma, and you can say that Putin has achieved a major victory in that. But now the question is, the war is still going on, and it is we still don't know which way it's going to blow. The wind is going to blow, and you must remember that now it has become, in the last 3 to 4 months, it has become an openly, manifestly proxy war between the US and Russia. So, and it is particularly significant that on 1st March this month, President Biden visited Kiev. He made this so-called surprise and surreptitious visit from Poland by train to Kiev, and he suddenly appeared in Kiev. And that was not only to show his solidarity with Zelensky, but it was also to show that US is openly involved in this war. So far, it was a kind of a clandestine affair with mercenaries being sent from Europe and basically all the refugees in Germany and Poland and other neighboring countries who were picked up and sent to war in Ukraine, and they were being provided with arms and ammunition. But now, highly sophisticated arms have been provided by US, and US has provided plenty of missiles and drones, and US has also shared intelligence with the Ukrainian armed forces as to how to and where to attack the Russian forces. So US is in this game openly and for the long haul. So US has made it clear, President Biden made it clear that we are not going to let Ukraine be defeated. Now with this, The war has entered a new phase. So far, we thought that there would be a kind of a overwhelming use of force by President Putin, which would put an end to Zelensky's ambitions of holding on to the Russian territory, and there could be some kind of a peace negotiations after he accedes certain territory to Russia. In fact, this is exactly what Henry Kissinger said some time back. Henry Kissinger said that Ukraine must be pragmatic enough to accept the fact that certain Russian occupied or Russian speaking people's territory or land should be given to Russia, and that there should be a peace negotiation, and the matter should be ended. So, and if you remember, about 3 to 4 months back, under the auspices of President Erdogan of Turkey, Sergei Lavrov and Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, actually initialed a peace agreement. And before Kuleba could take it back to Zelensky, Boris Johnson, who was then Prime Minister of Britain, rushed to Kiev and made sure that there is no peace negotiations or peace agreement, because a peace agreement would mean that the West would lose on its objectives. It would not, it would completely compromise on the objectives it had listed for itself but not declared. So that is to cripple Russia. And now, as you might have heard recently what Sergei Lavrov said in Delhi at the Raisina dialogue on 2nd March, that the President of the United States and the Secretary of the NATO, Stoltenberg, and Borrell, and Olaf Scholz, these leaders have now been openly saying that Russia should be defeated. I mean, if that is the objective of this war, it is going to be a never-ending war, because it is not going to be so easy to defeat Russia. So far, America has been fighting this war on the cheap because it's Ukrainian lives which are involved, not American lives. And interestingly, about a week back, Zelensky said in some foreign capital, he said that it's time that America sent its sons and daughters to fight the war. I mean, he's being absolutely stupid. I mean, nobody in America actually believes that anything like that is going to happen. And President Biden has not promised anything like that. And it is now Zelensky is stretching himself far beyond his pay grade or his competence in asking American sons and daughters to fight. So that is not going to happen. But Ukrainians will continue to die in large numbers, and America will continue to supply arms. And Zelensky has now been asking for F-16s. He has been asking for ballistic missiles and to target the Russian territory. And that's not going to happen, and that will lead to NATO's direct interference in the war. And then you never know. Russia might attack Poland. It might attack some part of Germany, God knows, or Finland. These are the easy targets. Finland or maybe some Baltic countries. And then NATO will be put to severe test as to whether NATO will actually come to the aid of those countries. So we are in a kind of a stalemate situation. So that's where we are right now.
You've kind of described, you've described the entire situation in a very, very clear sense, and that's something which is very interesting because we can build the conversation right there. The biggest challenge I look at as far as the Ukraine war is concerned, that the personal capital involved of the leadership of both the sides. They have put out statements where they either take one side or the other. There is no middle approach that has been taken by any of the leaders. President Putin, to a large extent, was quiet, was not involved in the kind of rhetoric that was being involved with the West. But then certain incidents like the Nord Stream and the blowing up the Crimea Bridge and this is kind of over.
Yeah.
A lot of people say that Putin is one of the, he's a moderate kind of a guy. He's not a very hardcore, this thing. And by pushing the Russians into a corner, they're actually pushing Putin to fall for the hardliners within the West? How do you kind of see that situation, sir?
Yes, I agree with your assessment of the Russian situation and particularly in the Kremlin. Putin himself described once that if you keep on pushing a cat to the wall and you surround him from all sides, finally it will strike back. It will hit back. And that's exactly where Putin is now. He has been pushed to the wall, and the NATO eastward expansion has been going on for the last 15 years. And 2014 was actually the start of the war in Ukraine, when the Western powers managed to bring about a coup against Yanukovych, President Yanukovych of Ukraine, and installed a puppet government, and then started something called a pro-democracy movement in the Maidan in Kiev. And that was when Putin actually uh, did a special operation and captured Crimea. um, yeah. So, and you must remember here that Crimea was actually in the hands of the Russian Navy through a lease agreement between Ukraine and Russia, which was signed nearly 20 years ago. He did not actually send any massive troops or massive naval armada to capture Crimea. Crimea was already in their hands, and he just tightened the control and then held some kind of uh, poll, referendum in Crimea, in which the people voted heavily in favor of joining Russia. And so he again went back to his Duma and ratified, got an act ratified by the Duma, and annexed Crimea. So that is when the situation gets hardened. And from then onwards, the US also has been pushing for membership of NATO of Ukraine and Georgia. And though this was strongly objected to by Putin in the 2014 meeting of NATO and subsequent meetings of NATO, where he met President Bush and Condoleezza Rice and discussed with them, saying that you cannot have Ukraine as a NATO member. That's a no. That's a red line for Russia. At that time, they postponed the discussion and said, "Okay, we will not will not have Ukraine as NATO member." And then, but they kept pushing it. And actually, what happened was, why did he go into Ukraine in February 2022? The reason is that Ukraine had signed some kind of a, this military alliance, LEMO agreement, which India has also signed with America, that where you reconcile your armed forces with that of the NATO forces. You sign an agreement by which I'm forgetting the exact word. That you sign an agreement by which you dump the Russian equipment and start buying the NATO equipment, whether it is conventional military force or air force. So Zelensky signed that agreement. Then, Russia had no option left. I mean, then President Putin knew that after this agreement is signed, uh, there will be no backward step for Ukraine, and Ukraine will be supported by U.S. Armed forces and NATO armed forces. So it's time for him to actually show that what he wanted to do, and though he had amassed more than 100,000 troops on Belarus-Ukraine border, he held back for a long time. But then he knew that Zelensky was not going to be easily deterred by this show of strength, so he had to march into Ukraine. Now, one point I want to mention here. Initially, for a lot of people understood the Russian argument. Even analysts in the United States who were left of the center and who were anti-establishment, they understood the compulsions under which Putin was doing what he did, and they supported him. But now, 1 year down the line, things have become a bit more difficult, and people's sympathies for Putin have dissipated, and there's a general feeling in the West that it has been a humanitarian disaster, and sooner or later there should be a peace negotiation. But here, one important point to mention is that Zelensky has got an act passed in his parliament saying that anybody who negotiates with Russia will be considered as an enemy of the nation. As long as Putin is in power, you cannot have a peace negotiation with Russia. I mean, if Zelensky takes such a hard line and prevents his own foreign minister from meeting Sergei Lavrov and has a negotiation, peace negotiation, then Ukraine has closed all its doors.
It's
Yeah,
absolutely ridiculous, and the hard line that has been taken, which is it's quite funny, sir. Uh, Sir, as a country, the Ukrainians seem to have put in all they had, and that is pretty evident at the moment because of the kind of, I can't confirm it, but purported losses that have been reported, and by a lot of Western media outlets as well. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen was the president of the EU. I think by mistake or something, she blurted out 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers dead about 3 months ago.
yeah,
So to take it at that, one looks at a Ukrainian loss rate of about 150, 175,000 troops by now. And this is again by their own reports coming out of Bakhmut, which is in the east. Uh,
correct, correct.
it's like a meat grinder, sir, and it's a terrible thing to say. Uh,
Yeah,
that's what we see happening on the ground. Now, a lot of people thought that the Russians would come with a big hammer in the winter, but they didn't. How do you interpret this? And is the big hammer going to come down, or is this going to be just a grinding assault that the Russians will
talking about the Ukrainian loss, actually, a week back I read somewhere that in Bakhmut region, Ukraine was losing about 1,000 soldiers per day. That was the kind of losses they were suffering. And if you see the geography of Bakhmut, it had a population of about 70,000 people before the war, and today it's reduced to 3,700. People have fled or people have died. So it's enormous. The loss for Ukraine is absolutely mind-boggling, and one wonders whether Zelensky is the biggest traitor to his country, or what is he? What is he up to? He is killing his own people for his ego and for his great friendship with White House. So, and what is he going to gain at the end of it? Even if assuming that America goes on supplying weapons to Ukraine, how long can he fight? Will America supply the soldiers? That's what he is now asking. The fact that he's asking America to supply soldiers means that his soldiers are his numbers in the game are up. He is having very limited number of soldiers to fight, and according to some indications, he is even sending teenagers to fight. And all kinds of people who are picked up as mercenaries, probably from Syria or Libya, wherever they are. They're going and fighting, and as you know, there are already two mercenary groups fighting on both sides. One is the Wagner group on the Russian side, and on the Ukrainian side also there have been mercenary groups fighting the war. And in fact, the biggest blow to the Ukrainian mercenaries happened in Azov steel plant, where they were all hidden, and they were completely bombed out of that existence. And that was and in fact, interestingly, at that time in the Azov steel plant, they found one U.S. congressman who managed to escape, and Russia handed him over to the Americans. So you can imagine how deep is the involvement of the American side. These U.S. congressmen are found in the most unlikely places. Like you had these fellows selling arms to Afghanistan tribes in the earlier war against the Soviet Union. That film, which you might remember, with Tom Hanks and Om Puri playing as General Ziaul Haq, and so his name is Charlie Wilson's War. Yeah. So
fight?
there are Charlie Wilsons everywhere, and there are Charlie Wilsons who are selling American equipment, are working as agents for the military-industrial complex, and yeah, they actually put their foot in the wrong place, and sometimes they get killed, sometimes they get saved. So it's a very risky operation. In fact, recently I heard an American analyst saying that it is not only MIC, military industrial complex, it's MICC, military industrial congressman complex. Yes. So that is the reality of the American war game. So everybody is on the take there, and everybody wants to make a huge fortune. And so the war is a big game for the American industry. So it doesn't
Yes.
matter whether it's Ukrainians are dying or Afghans are dying or Iraqis are dying. So, but Russia is also paying a heavy price.
Indeed, sir, absolutely. As a matter of fact, the BBC day for yesterday reported they did some head counts and grave counts and stuff like that, and they reported about 16 or 20,000 Russian losses, and they're saying that should be around about, you know, 15 or 20% deviation is something that the BBC has claimed. So when we look
Yeah,
at the
actually, in this particular war, neither BBC nor CNN is an independent, impartial reporter. So whenever I hear a BBC report, I go back to France 24 or Deutsche Welle or Russia Today to correct my, balance the viewpoint. And so one has to listen to various sources of information for that. And the situation is dire on both sides, and Russia has called for a mobilization of around 300,000 troops, and also there's been a lot of people fleeing from Russia. According to the Western sources, 1 million people have fled from Russia, either to escape compulsory drafting, um, or just to get out of this bad situation within Russia. Um, so that's also happening there.
so what does one say about? See, let me rephrase that. Ukraine has always been on the borderline as far as ideological issues is concerned. Uh, the pre-existence of these right-wing movements in Ukraine, like the right sector, which is the big body of all
Yeah.
of them, and the Azov, and then multiple other. Azov came out of a football club in Kharkiv, and there are multiple other such movements that actually came about. And a lot of the problems with the Russian people in Ukraine have actually been because of these, the Russian ethnic people in Ukraine, because of these right-wing movements that have been taking place.
Correct,
In
correct.
2019, the Azov battalion was marked as a terrorist by the U.S. Congress. But today
Yes.
we see commanders of that battalion standing in the Congress and giving lectures. How
Yeah.
can the West justify that to itself, sir?
Actually, yes, those were the very groups whom Putin called as the neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine, which were directly attacking and killing Russians. And according to the Russian Putin's information, there were about 14,000 Russians killed in the last 3 years in by these neo-Nazi groups. And one of the main reasons why he went to protect them was to eliminate these neo-Nazi groups, and that was one of the three objectives he enlisted in the special operations: demilitarization of the Ukrainian armed forces and denazification of the Ukrainian society and its militant wings. So, as you rightly brought it out, that these were declared as terrorist groups by U.S. Congress, but when Russia attacks them, they suddenly become liberators and saviors of Ukraine. So, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I mean, that has always been the logic of the Western world. So, if you recall just as there is Wagner group supporting the Russia as a Russian proxy warfare group, we had a Blackwater group in Iraq, in Afghanistan, which was doing exactly what the Wagner group is doing for the Russians. The Blackwater did that for Americans. And so much so that at one point of time, Hamid Karzai had to tell Americans very clearly, get the hell out of this Blackwater group out of my country. I don't want this Blackwater group in my country. They started killing Afghans, in the name of protecting the American military forces. So they've been carrying, and Eric Prince was the head of this Blackwater group, and he is credited to be the one who trained ISIS. You may not know that. ISIS, which is created by Saudi Arabia, and and the Emirati kingdom, with a budget of $1 billion, was actually trained by Eric Prince of Blackwater Group. And so afterwards, when ISIS starts killing Americans, then they become a threat to America. Till then, it was absolutely passe. ISIS is also. They thought that ISIS will go and eliminate Saddam with this Syrian armed forces. Assad, President Assad. When they failed in that, they started attacking the minority groups within Syria, and so they became a threat to international community when they killed Americans. So this is a very dangerous world we are in.
You mentioned something really interesting, and I wish to take you up on that particular discussion about Middle East sometime in the future, sir. But coming back to Ukraine, because that's a discussion that people have just not had. People have no clue
Yeah.
of the entire conundrum which is actually happening in the Middle East. And which
Yes.
brings me to a question about Ukraine as well, is that when the US gets done with its purpose or realizes that they can't do anything more, they just pluck up and pop out from there. We've seen that happening in Afghanistan, we've seen it happening in Vietnam, we've seen it happening in multiple other places. If I may just put up a map, sir, so that all of us can understand.
Yeah, very good, good.
20% of the country has already been taken up by the Russians, as we can see the orange and the other parts in the east. If there is
Yeah,
a offensive that comes across, let's say in the spring or whenever the Russians are, in a place to conduct that offensive, Ukraine is going to lose pretty much their entire revenue producing region, industrial plus agricultural.
correct.
What do you think the US will do at that point of time? Because the troops aren't going in, that's something that we know.
Yeah, absolutely.
What will happen then, sir?
US has very little option when Ukraine throws its hands up. And the point will come when Ukraine will throw its hands up and say, "We have done with this war. We are done with this war. We want our people to come back, who have gone as refugees all over neighboring countries." And says, "We are already lost so many people, millions, or maybe 100,000, hundreds of thousands of people we are lost, and we want some peace, and we want to live in peace with our neighbor." And then when Zelensky throws his hands up, or somebody within the Ukrainian army decides to overthrow Zelensky and declare peace with Russia, then it will be a different ball game. I mean, America will have to withdraw from the situation, though it will not suit American military interests. But that is the only way I can see. I don't see a coup happening in the Kremlin. That is simply not going to happen. Putin seems to be completely in control of his armed forces, his intelligence service, his Congress, and there is no significant opposition to Putin.
Even the people, sir. Today the people stand
Yeah,
behind
even
him.
people also, yes. People also, though the BBC keeps on highlighting that today two men came to the Kremlin and held a placard and all that, but people have also given up on protesting in Moscow Square.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So my last question for this very, very incisive interview, I think, there's certain things that have been mentioned on this interview that have not been mentioned in TV. And I'm glad that that happens because people get more attracted towards watching these kind of shows to get the real input of what's happening on the ground. My last question to you, sir. Things in Eastern Europe for the past, let's say, 500 years have uh, been in battles, in confrontations, in various different situations of standoffs. And wars and issues in Europe are always resolved by exchange of land.
Correct, correct.
For the past
Yeah,
500 years, you can see the history, it's always the case.
yeah, yeah.
How do you think there would be an amicable resolution to this war with regards to Eastern European standards of
You
exchange of
know,
land?
yeah, it's interesting that you raised that point. Because if you recall the past history of Ukraine, it was ruled by a Polish kingdom, Okay, and Poland, even today, there are reports or analysts are saying that after the war, Poland will take away the territory it wants. Russia has already taken 20% of the land mass, and Poland will take away its territory, Ukrainian territory. And so Ukraine will be left with probably a few districts or a few provinces, And so it's going to be a much diminished Ukraine at the end of the war. And you rightly say that, and who knows, Germany also might make a claim to it. I mean, Hitler was the one who actually launched a war in Eastern Europe to claim Lebensraum. I mean, he said living room. He wanted more living room for the Aryan race. So he went on accumulating living room, and his argument was, first give me the Sudetenland, that is part of Austria, and then from Sudetenland he went on to occupy parts of Yugoslavia, parts of Austria. Then only when he attacked Poland, then Britain, because of its treaty agreement with Poland, entered the war. And till then, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain went on telling Hitler, "Okay, take this and no more, take this and no more." So they went on appeasing Hitler. I mean, anyway, so that is how the Second World War ended. I mean, so began. You must remember one point here. At the end of the Second World War in 1945, there was only one power standing in Europe, and that was Soviet Union,
Yeah.
who was and ruled by Joseph Stalin. Germany was reduced to rubble. France was under occupation of Germany for 4 years out of the 6-year war. Britain had been reduced to another, impoverished country. So the only powerful country in entire Europe was Soviet Union. And it is to diminish the power of that Soviet Union, which is now Russia, that this war is being carried on. And America is determined to see that Russia is diminished greatly. So let's see where it goes.
The intertwining of history normally does not happen in American wars because Afghanistan had literally no history. It was a 3 or 5 year history that just
Yeah. Afghanistan was a different case. Afghanistan, of course, has a history of defeating the British army. Afghanistan was the location where the Great Game was fought between Britain and Russia. And Afghanistan gave very hell to the British soldiers. So
absolutely.
yeah.
So that's
About
what you. Sorry, sir. Please.
Let's continue this dialogue. We can talk more about the Middle East. I have during my work tenure, I have done a lot of work on the Central Middle East, Iran, and Egypt, and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf kingdoms. So we can talk about that. That's also a very fascinating area.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I said I'm going to take you up, sir, because you mentioned certain things that a lot of people know, but nobody talks about. And something that we in India need to understand, because if we need to get into the great game of the world in the future, we must know how the world works.
Yes, yeah. That's for another day.
On that note, so this has been an insightful episode. I must say that a lot of things are mentioned here that are not mentioned in Western media or even our media in India. And the worst part about, excuse me, the worst part about the whole thing is that the game which is being played with lives of people, and not for the lives of those people. It's being played for a larger narrative that those people don't even understand.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, that's how the industrial empire works. I mean, so it doesn't matter if a few 100,000 people die in Yugoslavia or in Ukraine or in Afghanistan or Iraq. I mean, so the industrial complex keeps on reaping its profits. So
that's an eye opener, sir, and that's what I'm trying to say. Indians need to understand how the ball bounces and how the world actually works. Sir, thank you so much for throwing a little bit of a light into that, and I'm sure, and I hope to have a long running relation with you where we talk and learn from you going forward in the future. Till then, sir, thank you so much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Aadi. Thank you. It's been a great pleasure.